So apologies for not getting this video out yesterday. I was very under the weather. I'm feeling better today. So let's get back into these previews and I'll kind of round up what I missed yesterday with some new stuff that came out this morning. And let's get to it. First up is Bringer of the Last Gift. It's an 8-drop 6/6 vampire demon with flying that says when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, each player sacrifices all other creatures they control and then returns all creature cards to from their graveyard to the battlefield that were not destroyed by the bringer here. So this is a reprint in essence of Living Death from Tempest. Very fun card to use, but it's a 5-drop. This is an 8-drop. It's a little harder to do. You can't cheat it out and get the effect. You have to pay the 8 full cost. Now, granted, this would be really good in something like a Rakdos Lord of Riots deck where if you lose their life, you cheapen it up and then you slam this down. It's a great way to go about it, but you're going to lose Rakdos in the process. But there's going to be some functions to go with this deck. I can't wait to try them out. Next up is Tarian's Journal for 1 and a black. Legendary artifact, tap, sacrifice another artifact or creature, draw a card, activate only as a sorcery. Pay 2, discard your hand, transform Tarian's Journal, and it turns into the Tomb of Aklazatz. It's a legendary land cave, taps for a black, and you can tap it and cast a creature spell from your graveyard this turn. If you do, it enters with a finality counter on it and is a vampire in addition to its other types. Now, if you remember from the first video a couple days back, finality counters make it so when the creature dies, it gets exiled instead of going back to the graveyard. So, it's a great reanimation type tactic, but you still have to pay the cost to get it back out of the yard. But if you're just missing that one key piece, it might be worth trying out. So I kind of like this card. Next is a card I've had to practice pronouncing about a half dozen times to get correct. I think I'm getting this right now. Matzalantli, the Great Door for 3 colorless, legendary artifact, tap, draw a card, discard a card. So great for fueling the new descend mechanics, descending stuff. Also good for chalking your graveyard full of stuff to reanimate. And then you can pay 4 and transform it, but you have to have 4 or more permanent types among cards in your graveyard. So this is kind of like a modified variation of Delirium, where instead of looking at all card types, it looks at permanent types. So you have things like planeswalkers, enchantments, artifacts, creatures, battles. Those are the like permanent types you can look at for the graveyard, and it turns into the core legendary land with Fathomless Descent. Tap up and add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So if you're playing like an oops all permanent style deck or something like this could actually be pretty good, and you can get a ton of mana off of it. Then we have Terror Tide. It's a new wrath effect for 2 black with Fathomless Descent. All creatures get -X until end of turn, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So this is like the big thing with Fathomless Descent. It looks at all permanent cards in your graveyard. It's really pushing you to play more permanents and less actual just instant sorcery spells. This could be good depending on how the deck's built. Again, you're looking at a deck that's very heavy in permanent. You're going to need to have at least 3 permanents in your graveyard to get the going rate for a 4-drop black sweeper effect of -3 for 4 mana. Otherwise, this isn't worth casting until you get to that threshold point. But I will say on the bright side, this does scale up as the game goes on. So it's not a dead card like some -3 cards, whereas you're like, oh, it doesn't do anything at this point in the game. But if you have like, 8 or 9 permanents in your graveyard at that point, it's a pretty good sweep then. Then we have Threefold Thunderhulk, a 7-drop gnome that enters with 3 counters on it. And when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you create a number of 1/1 gnome artifact creature tokens equal to the power. You can pay 2 and sacrifice another artifact to put a counter on it. So you can kind of feed the gnome artifacts into itself to put an additional counter on there. This works really, really good with, of course, doubling season, Vorinclex, anything that doubles counters. You're gonna get really good use out of this, and it's gonna create more and more of these gnomes. So like if you say you have just doubling season on the board, it's gonna come in with 6 counters on it and create 6 gnomes. Attack, it's gonna create 6 every time, and you just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, 7 mana for a 3/3 is not a very good rate. But if you have a way to either cheapen the cost of this or, again, the counter doubling stuff, this can be a pretty good threat, and I can't wait to try it in Commander and in Historic Brawl. So I had to look up a translation for this next one. This one is translated as Wandering Throne. For 4 colors, you get a 4/4 construct that when it enters, you choose a creature type, and it ends up gaining the creature type that you pick, and all creatures of the chosen type, if they have a triggered ability go off, it triggers an additional time. Now, unlike a lot of these kind of cards, it's not just enters the battlefield effects, it's all triggers. So ETBs, death triggers, draw triggers, whatever kind of triggers your stuff might have attached to them, this is going to go off a second time with this thing going off. And there's a lot of different applications. One that I just saw that somebody mentioned was Miram's Sentinel Worm. So you name dragons, and then when this comes into play, it'll produce additional copies of it, and then it'll actually give you multiple triggers of Miram going off later in the game. um, in my mind, you could do something with like vampires where there's the triggered ability off the new veto that would work really well here. There's a bunch of different types of decks that you could do this with and get multiple triggers off of things. So this will be a fun one to mess with too. Another one that had to be translated, and I've actually seen two different translations of this card. It either translates as the Millennium Calendar or the Thousand Year Calendar, depending on which translation you find. For a colorless, you get a legendary artifact that says whenever you untap a permanent, you put that many time counters on this. And then you can pay two to double the number of time counters that are on it. And then when it has 1,000 time counters on it, each opponent loses 1,000 life. That's what you call an alternate win con. Now that seems very unobtainable, but it's actually fairly obtainable for what it does. People have actually done the math. If you were to play this on turn one and just use the counter doubling on it every turn, and nobody interacts with it, turn nine, this will do 1,000 damage to each of your opponents. Now, somebody else also mentioned there's another fun interaction with all will be one, which says whenever you put a counter on any permanent you control, it deals damage equal to the number of counters put on there. So you can actually start blasting it away at players' life totals well before this thing actually hits the 1,000 count, and just start nuking players off the board for 100, 200, 300, just boom, 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 gone. They're not going to survive unless they can make themselves hexproof. So there's some applications there too. And then we have Aklazatz himself, Deepest Betrayal for 3 black black 4/4 Bat God. Flying lifelink. Whenever it attacks, each opponent discards a card, and then for each opponent who can't, you draw a card. Whenever an opponent does discard a land card, you create a 1/1 black bat token with flying, and when it dies, you get to flip it over into a land like the other gods, and it becomes Temple of the Dead. It taps for a black, and then you can pay 2 and a black, tap it to flip it back over. But you can only activate this if a player has 1 or fewer cards in hand. So some people are kind of disappointed with how Aklazat's turned out. I'm going to flip it back over to him because he's a discard thing. So you're going to want to actually try to feed your opponent's cards, which then can kind of backfire on you. But you want to be able to get the discard to get the 1/1 bat tokens off of it to actually get the full effect of Aklazatz himself. But this does interact with like life gain trigger effects, things that like the original Veto Thorn of the Duskgrowth. He's going to drain extra life off of his damage that he does. You're going to get discard triggers, which would work well with Triggered God of Fright if you're into that kind of thing. That's kind of draws a lot of hate from people, though. One thing I did notice, though, of the gods that they've revealed so far, this is the only one that has a secondary creature type of bat, where the other ones are just gods. So I don't know yet what the green and blue, if there's going to be a green and blue god in the set, but we haven't seen them yet. So we'll have to wait and see if this is the one outlier there. Then we have Kumena's new best friend, Deep Root Pilgrimage for 1 and a blue. Whenever 1 or more non-token merfolk become tapped, create a 1/1 blue merfolk with hexproof. So if you don't remember what Kumena Tyrant of Araska does, it taps a merfolk to make him unblockable, or taps 3 to draw you a card, or taps 5 to put +1/+1 counters on all your other merfolk. Well, you can go, okay, I'll make him unblockable, make him unblockable, make him unblockable. Just do it one at a time. Just tap, 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 tap. And it's going to start chaining out. The only downside here is it's non-token, so you can't go infinite here and keep making merfolk. That would be kind of busted. But this is really good if you're going to try to do a merfolk creature type matters deck. I kind of like this, and I can't wait to try it out. Then we have our first dinosaur dragon. It's Bone Horde Dracosaur for 3 red red. It's a 5/5 flying first striker that says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. If you exile a land this way, create a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token. If you exiled a non-land this way, you get a treasure token instead. So this is kind of an interesting card. It's not like the greatest 5-drop dragon there is. There's much better ones out there, but you're a a dragon deck, this is actually pretty good. And then you get to have some extra card red impulse draw, basically. You get to create more dragons on the board, or you get to create treasures to ramp into your other dinosaurs or other dragons if you're going that route. So there's some applications that I want to try in both variations. Then we have another translate card. This is the Bloodletter of Aklazats. For one in triple black, you get a 2/4 vampire demon that with flying that says whenever one of your opponents loses life on your turn, they lose double that amount instead. So this is kind of a variation on wound reflection, but this is attached to a creature which has the application of being able to be easier to clone. So you can clone this with like blue stuff. So like a black blue deck playing this, you can clone it, get multiple copies, so then it would double and then it would double again. There's other things that you can kind of mess around with. You can also increase power and toughness of your creatures to just blow somebody out. Like they think they're safe. Oh, they can't do that much damage. Play a doubler of some sort, and all of a sudden, boom, they just blow up. Next is a card that came up on Twitter this morning for me. It hasn't shown up in Mythic Spoiler yet, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about it here. It's Amalia Benavides Aguirre. She was in the story. If you haven't read that yet, it's a pretty good story. For a black and a white, you get a 2/2 Vampire Scout. Ward pay 3 life. Whenever you gain life, Amalia Benavides Aguirre explores. Explore means that you look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you can put it in your hand. Otherwise, you can put a counter on the creature and either put the card back on top of your deck or put it in your graveyard. So, and then it says if her power is exactly 20, destroy all other creatures. So she's kind of like if she's around and she hits 20, your opponent's going to lose the game because they're going to blow up all their creatures. They're not going to have any blockers, and she's going to have 20 damage to be able to smack somebody in the face with. As a commander, if you get her to 20 and then you gain another life, she gets 21, and you can just hit them right in the face, and they're out with commander damage. So there's different things that can be done here. And remember, it's whenever you gain life, so it's every instance of gaining life. So, like your soul wardens and the stuff like that gain you life when a creature comes into play, each trigger is going to cause her to explore. And if you have a non land on top of your deck, you just leave it on top. You don't even have to ditch it off the thing. You're just like, I'll reveal this, say 8 tokens come into play. I'll reveal that non land card 8 times and put 8 counters on them, Amalia. So there's some interesting things I want to do with this one too. I kind of like this card. I'm going to finish out today's video with some of the Jurassic Park cards that were revealed over the last couple of days. These are cards that are coming in the set as like a bonus kind of thing that ties into the dinosaur themes of Ixalan. So let's take a look. So this one is Compy Swarm. For one black green, you get a 2/2 dinosaur at the beginning of the end step. If a creature died this turn, create a tapped token that's a copy of Compy Swarm. So this thing multiplies. As long as you're able to have something die and go to the graveyard every turn, you're going of your turn, I should say. You're able to create like more and more, and they're just going to spread out. So this is kind of interesting. And then we have Don't Move. For 3 white white. You got a sorcery that says destroy all tapped creatures until your next turn. Whenever a creature becomes tapped, destroy it. So that means any kind of activated abilities, any kind of attackers are coming in. If you can tap somebody else's creatures down in some way, this is actually a really good board wipe. So a big application I could see here is in a Hilda deck where we're trying to tap our opponent's creatures down anyways. So, you can blow up everything if they had some stuff that was untapped or has vigilance or whatever. If you can use Hilda's abilities and stuff to start tapping down things, because Hilda gives you things if you tap their stuff. So if you play a card to tap down stuff, it'll blow the creature up along with giving you one of Hilda's benefits. One thing I will say is if you play this card, I would highly recommend telling your group there's no takebacks for forgetting about the destroy if it becomes tapped. You're playing the card and you want it for the effect of blowing up stuff if it gets tapped. And it's not really fair to you as the player to play this that they're like, oh, I forgot that ability was there. I'm not going to attack or I'm not going to activate this ability. Try to enforce those no takebacksies on this kind of stuff. Unless it's just like a really loosey goosey casual game. But like if you're playing for prizes or anything like that, don't let them take it back. Then we have a card that I really like because I like clones. It's Dino DNA. For a colorless, you get an artifact that says 1 and tap, exile target creature card from a graveyard. Activate only as a sorcery. So it's any graveyard. It's yours, theirs, whatever. Then you can pay 6, create a token that's a copy of a target creature exiled with Dino DNA, except for it's a 6/6 green dinosaur with trample, only activate as a sorcery. So there's a few options here. You can use this as graveyard hate. You can activate it to build up a collection of dinosaurs, quote unquote, on it because it keeps anything that's attached to it, but you only get one at a time. There's a lot of things, or like if they had a really big threat, you manage to kill it and it's sitting in the yard, and they have the ability to get it back, eat it out of the yard, and then it's yours to bring back out of the yard, or basically bring back into the game as a token later. And then these tokens then basically it'd be doubled with doubling season, parallel lives, annoyed procession. No, the the fun stuff that works with tokens. Next is Ravenous Tyrannosaurus. For 4 red green, you get a 6/6 dinosaur with Devour 3, which means as it enters, you sacrifice any number of creatures that you have, and it gets triple the amount of counters equal to whatever you sacrifice. So if you sacrifice 5 tokens to it, it comes in with 15 counters on it. And whenever it attacks, it deals damage equal to the power up to one target creature, and any excess is dealt to the controller. So, like, say you sacrificed 15, it's a 21/21 dinosaur, and when it swings, it's gonna blast something. So say you blast a 1/1, it's gonna deal 20 damage to that player, and then they lose their 1/1 blocker or whatever. And if you manage to give this trample, then it's just stupid after that. This card sounds awesome. So I really like the next card. This thing mentions an ability I actually put in my Galadriel video a week or two back. Life finds a way. For 2 and a green, you get an enchantment that says when a non-token with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under the control, you populate. So what that does is it creates a copy of any token creature that you have on the board. So with the dinosaurs and stuff that are coming in the set, there's things that make dinosaur tokens, but it doesn't necessarily have to be dinosaur tokens. It can be any token, but you're able to populate and create additional copies. So I really like this card. Next is Elian Allen Paleontologist. For 2 advanced colors, you get a human scientist, 2/5. Tap, exile a creature card from your graveyard, discover X, where X is the mana value of the exiled card, activate only as a sorcery. So discover is kind of like the new Cascade variant that they're putting into the game, where you exile cards until you hit a non-land with mana value equal to or less than um the card that was exiled in this case, but whatever the Discover X happens to be. And then you get to cast it without paying it, or you get to put it into your hand. So if you don't like what it's doing, if it's detrimental to you at the time or whatever, you can put it in your hand instead, but you at least get that card, and then you put the rest on the bottom in a random order. This is kind of interesting. I kind of like how this goes because, like, your stuff that's dead, you can basically recycle into more cards or free cards later, or maybe you just need to dig for an answer. There's a lot of things here that I really like going with this card. And then the last card of the day here is Indoraptor, the perfect hybrid. For 1 hybrid green, black, and red, you get a 3/1 dinosaur mutant with Bloodthirst X, Menace, and Enrage. So the Bloodthirst ability X says when it enters, it comes in with X counters on it equal to the amount of damage you've dealt to each of your opponents this turn. So if you're doing like a widespread damage effective players, then you can actually put a ton of counters on this. Menace, make it harder to block, and then Enrage, when it is dealt damage, choose an opponent at random. It deals damage equal to its power to that player unless they sacrifice a non-token creature. So the fun thing here with the Enrage ability on this is if you can get its power and toughness high enough and that it survives, say, a burn down the house or something of that nature, you can deal damage equal to its power to a random player. It'll wipe up all the little stuff that they would have sacrificed to it in the first place. And then if they're only left with 1 or 2 big threats to sacrifice, they're going to lose their big thing too. And then this thing is going to smash on through. Or if they have nothing left, they're going to get blasted to the face. And then this thing can still swing at them. So I kind of dig that. That's kind of fun. Bloodthirst is kind of hard to get lined up. You have to play with it a little bit to get it to come up high enough. But if you can manage to pull that off, this thing can be a massive threat. So with all that said, today's video is done. I'm going to keep an eye out for more spoilers as I'm editing, and I might weave them in here somewhere if I can. If not, I will have more on the next video. And until then, we'll see you in the next one.